My brother texted, "Send me your card info, or don't bother coming to Christmas." I replied, "Then we're not coming." The next morning, Mom wrote, "Don't be petty, I already sent $5,300 from your account to help him with rent." That night, I called the bank, froze every family joint account, and filed a fraud report in her name. Then I emailed every relative the bank records, screenshots, and a copy of the report. By morning, 29 missed calls, 13 voicemails, and a text from Dad. "Your mother's in tears. Are you happy? I have been the responsible one my entire life. Not because anyone asked me to be. I just was. I paid my way through college, built a small but stable life with my wife, and somewhere along the way, I became the family ATM, without ever agreeing to the job description. My brother is 31. He has never held a job for longer than 8 months. Every time he gets fired, or quits, or gets asked to leave, there's always a perfectly reasonable explanation that somehow involves everyone except him. The landlord was unreasonable. The boss was jealous. The economy is broken. The system is rigged." In the last 4 years alone, my mother had quietly mentioned, almost like she was asking permission, that I had helped him out, a total of 3 separate times. The first time I heard that, I asked her what she meant by helped him out. She got vague in the way she always does when she's already done something and doesn't want to discuss it. That was the first warning sign I ignored. My mother is a difficult woman to argue with, not because she's loud or cruel, but because she's masterful at making you feel like you're the problem. She has this way of folding guilt into every sentence, until you're so tangled up in it that you forget what you were even upset about. Growing up, I called it her superpower. As an adult, I have a different word for it. My wife spotted it early. 2 years into our marriage, she said something that stayed with me. That my family treats my stability like it's a resource they're entitled to, not something I built. I didn't argue. I knew she was right. But knowing something and actually doing something about it are two very different things when you spent 34 years being conditioned to keep the peace. The joint account was a mistake I made 4 years ago. Right after my father had a health scare and we needed to move money around quickly for medical bills. My mother suggested it as a practical solution. It made sense at the time. I kept meaning to close it out once things stabilized. I kept not doing it. That account sat there like an unlocked door, and I was too busy living my actual life to remember that some people in my family had very few boundaries around what belonged to them. The text from my brother arrived on a Tuesday night. It was blunt, even for him. He said he needed my card information, and that if I couldn't help him out, I shouldn't bother coming to Christmas. That was it. No context, no explanation, no amount mentioned. Just send the card info, or stay home. I read it twice. My wife was sitting next to me, and I handed her the phone without saying anything. She read it, handed it back, and asked me what I was going to do. I told her I already knew. I typed back that we weren't coming. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in years, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. That kind of lightness in my family never lasts. The next morning, I woke up to a message from my mother. She said she understood I was upset, but that my brother was struggling and family is supposed to help each other. Then she dropped the line that made my stomach fall through the floor. She wrote that she had already sent the money from my account, $5,300, to cover his rent. She said she was sure I'd understand once I calmed down, and that she'd explain everything at Christmas. I sat on the edge of the bed and reread the message 4 times. My wife asked me what was wrong. I showed her the phone. She went very still in the way she does when she's genuinely angry, but choosing her words carefully. She asked me if I had authorized any transfer. I told her I hadn't. She looked at me and said something she'd been saying for 2 years, but this was no longer just a family issue. She was right. I didn't call my mother. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't do anything emotional. I went to the kitchen, poured a coffee, and thought, for about 20 minutes, about exactly what I was going to do. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. I explained the situation to the representative as clearly as I could. Unauthorized transfer from a joint account I had not approved. I had the account number, the approximate amount, the timestamp for my mother's text, and my own name as the primary account holder. The representative walked me through the process. I froze every account tied to my family, the joint savings, the linked checking, everything. Then I formally filed a fraud report. Fraud, in my mother's name. I want to be honest about how that felt. It wasn't satisfying in the way people imagine revenge is. It was more like stepping off a bridge and realizing too late that you're already in the air. It felt necessary and terrible at the same time. The bank representative confirmed that the report had been logged and that the matter would be reviewed. I thanked them, hung up, and sat in silence for a moment. My wife came in, and I told her everything I'd done. She didn't celebrate. She didn't tell me I was wrong either. She asked if I was okay. I told her honestly that I didn't know yet. The second part came after dinner. I sat down at my desk and opened my email. I had screenshots of my brother's original text, the one demanding the card info or threatening to exclude us from Christmas. I had a screenshot of my mother's message explaining she'd already sent the $5,300. I had the bank records showing the transfer. And I had a copy of the fraud report. I sat there for a long time looking at this file folder of evidence before I finally started composing the email. I didn't write a long message. I didn't explain myself, or editorialize or ask for anyone to take my side. I just laid it out. Here is what my brother sent. Here is what my mother did the following morning without my knowledge or consent. Here is what the bank records show. Here is the fraud report that has been filed. I sent it to every family member I had a working email for. Aunts, uncles, cousins who I hadn't spoken to in years, my father's sister, 2 cousins on my mother's side, who had always thought she could do no wrong. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I woke up at 5:17 in the morning to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. I looked at the screen. 29 missed calls, 13 voicemails, and a text from my father. He asked me if I was happy. He said my mother was in tears. He wrote it the way he always writes things, not as an accusation exactly, but as a weight he was placing into my hands and asking me to carry. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay there looking at the ceiling. My wife stirred beside me. She asked me what time it was. I told her. She asked if it was them. I said yes. She reached over and turned her own phone face down without looking at it, and we both just lay there in the quiet for a while. I want to explain something about my father because I think it matters. He is not a bad person. He never was. But he has spent 40 years being married to a woman who runs everything through emotional channels, and at some point, he stopped having an independent position on things. His default response to any conflict is to locate who seems most upset, and then redirect attention towards soothing that person, regardless of whether that person was right or wrong. Growing up, I understood this was just how he was. As an adult, I understand it's enabled a lot of behavior that never should have been enabled. His text wasn't designed to make me feel guilty. It was just a reflex. Someone in his house was crying, and his reflex was to reach out to whoever caused the crying and ask them to make it stop. I didn't respond to his text. Not yet. Instead, I got up, made coffee, and opened the voicemails on speaker, while my wife sat across from me. Most of them were variations of the same thing. My mother's voice, breaking in ways it had never broken when she was doing the thing she was now crying about. 2 of my aunts, telling me that I'd gone too far. That family doesn't do this to family, that I should have picked up the phone first. One of my cousins, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, left a voicemail telling me that what I did was cruel, and asking if I even understood what I'd put everyone through. One voicemail was different. It was my father's sister, my aunt on his side, who had always been a straight-line thinker. She said quietly that she'd read the email, looked at the records, and that if even half of it was accurate, she thought I'd handled it with more restraint than most people would have. She said she was sorry this happened. I played that one twice. By 8 in the morning, I had a response from my mother's younger sister, one of the aunts who left the frantic voicemail the night before. Her tone had changed completely. She said she'd gone back through the documents I'd sent more carefully, and she wanted to understand what she was looking at. She asked if the bank records were real. She asked if my mother had really sent the money without telling me. I wrote back a short reply, yes, to both. She didn't respond immediately. But about an hour later, she forwarded me a screenshot, a message my mother had sent her in a family group chat I wasn't part of. In it, my mother was describing what happened. But in her version, I had promised to help my brother weeks ago, and had backed out at the last minute. She said she'd only accessed the account because I had been ignoring everyone's calls. And she couldn't let her son get evicted. There was no mention of the text demanding card information. There was no mention that she had taken the money before I even knew it was being considered. In her version, she had simply stepped in to honor a commitment I had already made. I stared at that screenshot for a long time. Then I forwarded it to the same list of family members I'd emailed the night before, along with a time-stamped record showing that I had never sent any communication agreeing to send money, and that my brother's original text, the one where he threatened to exclude us from Christmas if I didn't comply, was sent and received at 9:47 on Tuesday evening, a full 11 hours before my mother claimed to have stepped in because I wasn't responding. I wasn't running a campaign. I was just keeping the record accurate. Around noon, my brother called. I let it go to voicemail. He left one. His tone was something I hadn't heard from him before. Not angry, not defensive, but something more careful. He said we needed to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand, and he didn't want this to blow up the whole family over the holidays. He said he'd been under a lot of pressure, and that the text he sent wasn't meant the way it sounded. I found that last part interesting. A text that said, "Send me your card info, or don't bother coming to Christmas," has a fairly limited range of interpretations. My wife asked me if I planned to respond to anyone. I told her not yet. She said she thought that was probably right, and went back to what she was doing. Around 2 in the afternoon, something shifted. A cousin, on my mother's side, one who I'd always considered more of her ally than mine, sent me a private message. She said she felt uncomfortable getting involved, but that she'd been in the family group chat all morning, and she thought I should know that the story was changing every few hours. First, my mother said I'd promised to help. Then someone pointed out the timeline didn't add up, and suddenly, the story became that the joint account was always meant to be a shared family resource. Then when someone asked why it had only ever been used in one direction, that subject got dropped and replaced with a conversation about how the fraud report was going to follow my mother and ruin her credit. That last part, the credit concern, was the version that had gotten the most traction. My cousin said she wasn't taking sides, but she thought I deserved to know what was being said. I thanked her. She said she hoped we could all get through this. The fraud report was the part that genuinely scared my mother, I think. Not the exposure, though that clearly stung, but the practical consequence of a document existing in the world that said she had done something illegal. Because the thing is, she had, whatever her justification, whatever stories she'd told herself about family responsibility and my supposed promise, she had accessed a bank account I was the primary holder of, moved $5,300 without my knowledge or consent, and then sent me a text the next morning, presenting it as a fait accompli. That is fraud. It doesn't stop being fraud because the person who did it is your mother. I want to be clear that I wasn't doing this to destroy her. I was doing it because I needed the money back, and because I needed a record to exist that made the retrieval of that money possible. I also needed it to stop. Not just this instance, the whole pattern. The slow ambient bleed of my finances that had been happening for years through politeness and guilt and the careful management of my discomfort. The fraud report was leverage. It was also true. By evening, I had a formal response from the bank confirming the report was under review, and that the freeze on the accounts would remain in place pending investigation. They said they would be in touch within 5 to 7 business days. I forwarded that confirmation to no one. I kept it for myself. My wife made dinner, and we ate at the kitchen table without talking much about any of it. She asked at some point how I was feeling, and I told her I felt tired. She said that made sense. We talked about other things, a show we'd been watching, something that happened at her work. It was the most normal 2 hours I had in days. After dinner, I finally opened the voicemails I hadn't listened to yet. Most were still variations on the same emotional pressure. But there was one from an uncle, my mother's brother, the one who'd always been her biggest defender at every family gathering. And he didn't say what I expected. He said he'd talked to my mother. He said he'd asked her directly whether she moved the money without my knowledge, and that she hadn't denied it. He said he understood why I'd done what I did. He said he thought the fraud report might be heavy-handed, but that he also understood I had no other option if I wanted to be taken seriously. Then he paused for a moment in the recording and said something I didn't expect. That he'd lent my brother money twice in the last 18 months that he'd never told anyone about, and that he wasn't going to be doing it again. He didn't ask me to drop the report. He just wanted me to know he understood. I sat with that for a while. My father texted again around 9 that night. This time it wasn't about my mother's tears. He asked if we could talk. Just the two of us, without involving anyone else. He said he wasn't calling to pressure me, and that he just wanted to understand what had happened from my side. I thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote back and told him I was willing to talk, but that I needed him to come into the conversation knowing what the documents showed, not what he'd been told at home. I told him I'd call him the next morning. He replied that he'd be waiting. That call with my father was the hardest part of all of it. He didn't defend my mother exactly, but he explained her, in the way he always does. The way that asks you to understand, without ever quite landing on accountability. He said she genuinely believed she was honoring a commitment I'd made. I told him that belief didn't make accessing my account legal or acceptable. He went quiet for a moment and then said he knew that. He asked me if the fraud report could be withdrawn. I told him it could, but that it'd depend on the money being returned. He asked me how much. I told him $5,300. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then he said he'd see what he could do. I told him I wasn't trying to send anyone to prison. I told him I was trying to get my money back, and to make sure this never happened again. He said he understood. He sounded tired, The kind of tired that comes from a long marriage to someone who is very certain they're always right. Before he hung up, he asked me one more thing. He asked if my wife and I would still consider coming for Christmas. That it depended on what happened next. He said he thought that was fair. Update 1. 3 days after the bank call, my father transferred the full $5,300 back into my account. No fanfare, no conditions. I got a notification on my phone and stared at it for a moment before showing my wife. She looked at the amount, looked at me, and just nodded. I called the bank the same afternoon and walked back the fraud report. I explained that restitution had been made, and that I wanted the matter closed. The representative confirmed the report would be noted as resolved, and that the freeze would lift within 48 hours. I didn't announce any of this to the family. I didn't send a follow-up email. I just let it sit. My brother never called back after his one voicemail. He sent a single text 2 days later that just said he hoped I was happy with what I'd done to the family. I didn't respond. My mother has not contacted me directly since the morning I got her text. That silence is so uncharacteristic of her that it feels like a different kind of message. Update 2. Christmas came and went. We didn't go. My wife and I spent it at home, which was quieter than any Christmas I could remember, and somehow more peaceful than any I had in years. We cooked something simple, watched a film, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. My father texted on Christmas morning to say he was thinking of us. I wrote back, and told him the same. 2 of my cousins reached out separately, both saying roughly the same thing. That the family gathering had been tense, that nobody really talked about what happened, that my mother had been quiet, in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. One of them said my aunt, the one who'd told me I'd handled it with restraint, had asked the table directly if anyone thought what had happened was acceptable. Nobody had answered her. I didn't feel triumphant reading any of that. I felt something closer to sad, if I'm honest. Not regret, I'd do the same thing again, but a kind of grief for the family I'd spent 34 years hoping we were, versus the one we actually turned out to be. Update 3. It's been about 6 weeks now. My father and I have spoken twice more. Both conversations were careful and honest in a way our conversations haven't been in years. He told me at one point that he'd known for a long time that things with my brother had been unfair, and that he'd looked the other way because it was easier than the alternative. He didn't apologize exactly, but he said it in a way that made it clear he understood what the looking away had cost. My wife and I officially closed the joint account last week. The bank representative asked if I'd like to open a new shared account, and I told him no, we were good. My brother's rent situation apparently resolved itself. Some arrangement with a roommate, from what my father mentioned. I didn't ask for details. My mother, as of this writing, still hasn't reached out to me directly. My father says she's convinced I humiliated her, that I had other options, that I could have just called her. He says she isn't ready to have the conversation. I've stopped waiting for her to be ready. The thing nobody tells you about setting a boundary with family is that it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in a room that's suddenly very quiet, wondering if this is what you actually wanted, and slowly realizing that what you wanted, what you always wanted, was for none of it to have been necessary in the first place. But here we are. My wife asked me the other night if I had any regrets. I thought about it properly before answering, which is something I've been trying to do more of lately. I told her I regretted that it took this long. She squeezed my hand and didn't say anything, and that was exactly the right response. I don't know what the next chapter with my family looks like. Maybe my mother eventually has the conversation. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe my brother figures something out for himself, without someone else's card information. Maybe Christmas next year is different, or maybe it isn't. What I know is that the account is closed, the money is back, and the record exists. And for the first time in a very long time, the quiet in my house is mine.